Elizabeth Chappell, a lifelong entrepreneur who finally found my niche. After years of new ideas and jumping from business to business, I figured out how to turn a craft into a successful career. In 2016, I started a monthly subscription box for quilters. That little startup has grown into a thriving, multiple six-figure business that I am so proud of. As a published author, designer of fabrics and patterns being sold throughout the world, my favorite thing to do is to teach others how to grow a career of their dreams. Each week, you'll hear from me or from other guests who are creative entrepreneurs, so you can learn exactly what to do and what not to do to grow a career that's more rewarding and successful than you ever thought possible. If you're ready to turn your craft into a career that you love, I am so excited you're here. Welcome to the Craft to Career podcast. Today's pattern is definitely for the quilt pattern writers, and it's very appropriate as the quilt pattern writing course, my signature course, is about to open. Starting September 9th, you can join the signature quilt pattern writing course. And even before then, August 29th, September 3rd, and September 5th, I have a free 3-day event that you can join where we dive into how much you can earn as a quilt pattern designer. And we're looking at actual data. I've pulled many different quilt pattern designers of different ages and experiences, and we're getting numbers. I'm not just, hypothetical, oh, you could earn, this is what I've earned. We're gathering data from many different quilt pattern designers to really get a painting of what's realistic. We're going to talk about the biggest tips for success, because after working with quilt pattern designers for years, I have seen what works, what things really need to be in place in order for someone to have success. And then the biggest mistakes to avoid, because time after time, if students come and say, I'm just not having success, and I see these common mistakes over and over again. So I'm going to share these with you so that you can learn what those things are so you can do them or avoid them and get a realistic picture of what it's like to be a quilt pattern designer and if this is for you. So with all of this in mind, with this coming up, I invited a good friend and very talented, dare I say, one of the best, most experienced professional quilt pattern writers in the industry that I know of, Jennifer Long. She's a fabric designer, is so talented, and we actually have something really exciting to announce that we share on this podcast. More details to come, but this is the first introduction to what's coming. And I cannot express how excited I am to team up and work with her. So take a listen. You are going to love today's episode, especially for the quilt pattern writers who are out there. Jennifer, I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast. Thank you and you've been a guest before. I'm excited to chat with you again on the topic of quilt patterns.
Hello, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me again. It is always a pleasure and a joy to be here with your community and with you talking about quilt patterns, something that's so dear and near to my heart.
Yeah, it's really cool, how our friendship started and how it's just progressed. I do feel like our paths crossed for a reason. And so I'm just, on a personal note, I'm glad that we're friends.
Oh, the feeling is so mutual. It's so mutual. It's just, people come into your life for reasons that are bigger than us. So I'm so grateful for you as well, my friend.
Yeah. And we've talked, and I think it's cool for our listeners to know, my listeners to know that I feel like we both have really cool strengths and skill sets that the other one doesn't have. And I respect so much your talents and skills, I just really do.
Oh, as do I. I know. I think we balance each other out 1,000%. We say that all the time. So it's a wonderful friendship in so many ways.
Yeah. So I would love to, my signature quilt pattern writing course is just about to open. And so I wanted to bring you on to really do a deep dive into quilt patterns. So for our listeners, can you share the progress of your, I don't know, experience, relationship with quilt patterns, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be so happy to. So, like I would say many of us or most of us, quilt patterns started off for me as a hobby. So it wasn't the first thing that I started sewing. I actually started sewing doll clothes and ballet costumes when I was young. And, once I just matured a little bit, I just didn't even understand the world of quilts until I got a little bit older, just maybe into my adult years. And then I thought, wow, you get to choose your favorite fabrics, cut them up, put them back together in a way that is just completely unique. And it was such a wonderful way to express yourself and to be tactile with fabric. And so it started off as a hobby, like it does for almost so many of us, right? But it quickly became an obsession or a passion of mine. And I just couldn't get it enough. I always say that I like dream in fabric or I dream in patterns because, while I was sewing one, I was already thinking about the next project that I wanted to make. I was already thinking, how could I put colors together that would be different, or how could I make it more efficient so I could do it faster? So I was already thinking this way. And that passion turned into an obsession. So instead of reading, my romance novels at the end of the night or anything like that, I had a stack, anything I could get my hands on. We were a young family at the time, so I would go to the thrift store and grab old quilt magazines, boxes of them, and boxes of quilt patterns, and I would just read and read and read. I would, like they're mine, I would just tear pages out of patterns that I loved. And just start to think how I could put them together to create new patterns. But beyond that, as I started reading and reading and reading night after night, I started looking at patterns and thinking, fabulous design, really confusing the way they put it together. Or, wow, I would have done this differently. And it was interesting because I didn't go down that path thinking that I was going to start doing that. It was just a natural progression of sort of the journey that I had already taken. And so I started analyzing patterns and starting to think of different ways, like this pattern is such a great design, but I wish you would have written it X, Y, Z, because then it would be an enjoyable sew. So the next phase to my journey was that I was a super young mom and had some friends in the industry that were looking for pattern testers. And so I was glad and happy. I just more new patterns to sort of touch and read. And I started testing for fabric designers within the industry. And it was honestly one of the best experiences of my life. And really maybe why I am where I am today. Because it opened up so many doors. I just did what I do. And I just gave them notes at the end, which I think shocked and floored a lot of them that I was, so much detail. And I'd be like, wow, there's things I would have done, like maybe try doing this, try this. Like even things like when I printed it from my printer, the pages weren't numbered. So if they fell out, that would, I was just noticing little things like this. And pretty soon some of them were like, have you ever considered writing patterns? Can you write patterns for me? And so I was thinking, well, now I should say I was already having skills that developing skills that I needed for pattern writing, which I think we'll talk about later in this podcast, which is I think it's imperative to writing patterns at a high level in the industry. So luckily I was already working in vector programs. So I knew how to illustrate and things for different reasons than quilt patterns, but it kind of blended together because I had the instructions part, I had the ideas about how to put it all together, and to be able to do the graphics and the layout. I had skills from another sort of avenue in my world from that. So I was able to start writing for some of these fabric designers. And when you start writing patterns and in the industry and you start doing a good job of them, then the word gets around and you kind of progress. So I'm so blessed and thankful that this journey has taken me through different fabric companies, working through so many wonderful different designers. And now, I am a fabric designer myself, but I am actually holding a position in a dream job of mine, managing the quilt pattern department at Riley Blake Designs. So that is, it's a huge honor to sort of see where that takes you, and how hard work and the right skill set can take you on that path and that journey.
Yeah. Okay. Two things. Very mysterious. I'm very curious. This vector image that you talked about. First of all, how were you learning this? What was it for? And what programs were you learning?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, we're going to start dating ourselves and get a little bit old. I think I'm quite a bit older than you, but anyways.
I don't think so.
Okay. So at the same time, you know this, Elizabeth, that I'm a doll designer, right? So I am an early childhood educator. And so I was already learning digitizing for machine embroidery at the time, way before this. So a lot of the skills that you need for machine embroidery are skills that translate into some like Adobe products. So I was learning how to digitize, but I was using some free programs at the beginning, like Inkscape, and different programs like that, where the skill set is kind of the same. It's just a little bit more clunky, but you could still get the job done. So I started out with, programs like that because I didn't want to invest in huge programs. But little did I know that time is money. So when you're young children are only sleeping for an hour and a half, and it takes you half the time to do something, then, the program that helps you do that faster and more efficient is worth it. And especially depending on, how you work. If you're going to continue to get hired, and this is a whole nother topic, but you'll be continue to get hired more and more if you work in a ghost pattern situation, the more efficient you are. Either if you're charging per hour, because they will want you again and again if you are a good price. But if you get paid per pattern, then you benefit even more and more by being more efficient. So it is a win-win situation to have the tools at your disposal that make the job the best it can be in the fastest and easiest way.
Yes. And I just want my listeners to know that I do want to dive into the ghostwriting a bit more, which actually my next question might lead into it. But your dream job at Riley Blake, can you tell us what you do and what that looks like?
Yeah, well, I can dive a little bit into it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I manage the pattern department at Riley Blake Designs. So in charge of all of the free patterns, ghost patterns that we do, the sew-alongs, block challenges. So all of the wonderful patterns that this dream company puts together go through my hands every day. I get to spend every single day touching quilt patterns in some way, shape, or form in boxed kits. It really is just the dream.
Well, and I love that that's the dream, because clearly this was meant for you. And anyone who wants to be a quilt pattern writer, there's so many venues like you're touching on. You don't write all of the patterns. There's people they hire, to help with all different facets in the company. But you see pattern, you eat and breathe quilt patterns. Like, quilt patterns, I don't know, dare I say, better than anyone else that I know, including me. Like, I don't like to admit that, but it's true, just because you do it all the time, you know?
It becomes just sort of like your language. Cause like I said, I dream in quilt patterns just because you're doing it, and anything that you put so much of yourself into, you just get better and better and better. And when you have the blessed opportunity to work full time, at something, then just without question, then you just, you're problem solving daily. And that's what quilt patterns are. Like we've talked about before so many times, they are an art form, and there isn't one way to the end result. There are multiple ways to get there. And there's decisions that have to be made along those ways. Who's your target audience? How do they best interpret things? How do you want to lay out your patterns? How many page counts do you need? There's just so many factors in there that you that you can think about, so that you think about before even before you open up like the program to start writing the pattern. And so once you do that, and when you see enough patterns and breathe enough patterns, then you can start making those decisions quicker and easier depending on who you're writing for or which audience you're writing for.
Well, and this was something that was interesting that I didn't even think about. And I can't even remember what we were talking about, but it was quilt patterns. And I said something like, is this method ideal because it saves more fabric? And I didn't even think much of it. And you were like, well, it totally depends, because you're with Riley Blake and you're not trying to think, how can we save the most fabric? You're trying to get the best product. And it's just not about scrimping and, doing as least possible. But then there's people who are more like upcycle, or people are like, oh, half skirt triangle versus flying geese. It's totally a matter of preference and where you're coming from.
You just think even beginner, intermediate, advanced too. So when you're talking about the fabric conservation, sometimes that's not the easiest way for a beginner sewist. So sometimes a sew and flip or a stitch and flip method where you do lop off that triangle and it ends up being quotations mark wasted fabric, is the easiest way for the best result for a beginner sewist. However, saying that if you are writing a pattern for an advanced sewist, or you're writing a scrappy pattern, then yes, you don't want to be doing single HSTs over and over. You want to be able to do them in a mixed match ways. So kind of knowing your objectives before you begin, and like your target audience, almost like if you think about it, like marketing too, like if you know who you're speaking to, then you can know how you should speak. If you know who you're writing for, then you know how to write that pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, with all the different people that you work with, what are things that stand out as a mark of an experienced, quality, I guess, quilt pattern writer?
Efficiency, number one. So I would say definitely, like with experience, is efficiency. The software, the programs that they use. So I think we're probably going to touch on this at some point, but there is, a standard within the industry of companies and layout and things like that too. So if you want to do a lot of collaborative work, then, the Adobe products are really the way to go. If you are working independently for yourselves, I didn't use them the whole time, so I'm not advocating that that's the only way in. Absolutely not. But if you that is something that will hold you back if that's the one thing that you cannot do and you want to work at a high level in a company or an industry. So those programs.
Well, okay, because I offer a free course on how to use Canva, and one of, I created a pattern in Canva, just like, is it possible? It totally is.
Yes.
It's a great, an Inkscape. There's, my very first pattern was written in Microsoft Word, which I actually really don't recommend, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere for sure. The end PDF, no one can see. Well, I shouldn't say no. So the end PDF, if it's downloadable, no one can see. If it's a print PDF, it can be seen, and in multiple ways. So if you do bleeds or not bleeds, so that's one thing that some programs like Microsoft Word cannot do. But also just like the image, and that's what we talked about, vector images there too, is just because certain programs are set up for printing. So if you want to get into even printing your own patterns, then you want to make sure that you are using a program that gives the highest resolution so that your images come out clean and gorgeous, you don't want to go through all of that work and effort and time and then just have not clean, clear printed pattern.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell? I'm actually curious. To be honest, now I'm just wondering when's the last time I bought a paper pattern, but when you look at paper printed patterns, can you tell this is not a good quality versus, I think this was Adobe or vector based?
Well, Like a lot of the paper stuff that I get now are books. I love paper magazines, and we live really, really rural. So I actually don't often get a chance to make it into a local quilt shop. So a lot of my shopping is online. So saying that, I think because a lot of the high level design, like just the circle that I'm in, they're using those programs. So I wouldn't say I notice it a huge amount right now, but it's definitely something that you want to make sure doesn't stand out as not being printed properly. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then just the paper quality too, if we're going to talk about printed patterns, paper quality is something that should be considered too. And there's, again, no right or wrong. And this is what we talked a little bit about, like knowing if you're writing a pattern for print, so you know page count and all of that. But, if you want your pattern to have a look of high end, then you're going to want to make sure that you have paper that represents that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And what are your thoughts now? This is one of those neither right nor wrong, totally opinion based, but okay, for those who buy patterns, they'll know. And this is a deep dive in quilt patterns, this whole podcast episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It is fun.
This is my cup of tea right here. I've got
it. So what's your personal opinion on saddle stitch? And for the listeners who are like, what the heck are you talking about? It's like a book where there's a staple down the spine, if you will, and it's folded over and it reads like a book, versus a pattern that you open and it's printed on normal paper, like 8.5 by 11, and you can turn it back and forth, and there is no spine down the middle.
Oh, well, I don't want to polarize myself, Elizabeth. Oh, my goodness. No, I can answer this one. Totally opinion, but yeah, it's a polarizing topic, I would say.
Is it? There's so many polarizing things.
I think there's pros and cons to both. So we've used both versions at Riley Blake. I've seen both versions very successful, and I see both versions applicable in many ways. I will say if you have multiple sizes or a larger pattern, a saddle stitch is almost imperative because, and I hope that you're numbering pages, because, there's nothing more frustrating than dropping a page or a number of pages and then losing the order that you should be in. So for me personally, I like to sew from a saddle stitch. Now, I don't mind, or I actually like, I know it's more expensive, but I actually like a full letter size saddle stitch instead of a half letter, because, I know sometimes the patterns for print size, that's why they go to the folded, so that the font can be a larger size. We discuss point sizes and what's the minimum that you can do and a comfortable read as well. But as far as myself personally, I like a saddle stitch just because I've got pieces of fabric everywhere and I just don't want to lose something where I'm at. And I just love the feel of a book. And so it feels like a little mini book to me. So I do like that, but both, if there's a lot of templates and stuff too, then I'm definitely a fan of the fold in half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am curious, what is this? And I guess it depends on the font, but what is the smallest point that you generally say, like, don't go below whatever?
Yeah. 9. Do not.
Okay. I was going to say 10. Yeah.
Yeah. Do not go below the 9. For sure. Not, I mean, again, like it depends what font that you're using. And then like 11 is kind of a really nice one. And so the thing is about it, if you need more pages, I mean, we can talk about this and we can go on for like days about this. Oh my goodness. But maybe look at how many words you're writing, I guess who your ideal customer is, and can you condense your words and create another illustration? Because when you think about it, just be curious. I would be curious if you polled your listeners, actually, how many people are reading the patterns without looking at the illustrations? How many are looking at the illustrations only without reading, which I do. That will be the category I'm in.
Same.
Or a mixture of both. So the only time that this is hilarious that I'm going to admit this right now, but the only time I read everything is number one, to look for the letter labels of the fabrics or the size, the trim sizes, or if I can't understand.
Yep.
If I can't understand, I'm wondering if and I mean this in a loving way, if there could be like a little bit more done to the illustrations on steps, if I'm having trouble understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So saying that, I wonder if we could condense the words more, which could increase your font size and highlight the larger, the most important things that we're looking for, like the letter labels and the cut sizes, the trim sizes. Yeah.
This is such a fun conversation. And then we get into like, how can you condense the images into the most condensed yet logical and you're not missing anything? Because sometimes I see images where it's repeat, repeat, repeat. I'm like, that is a waste of real estate on your page. Like you did not need to do that, you know?
Right. And again, if you're doing PDF, then that's not it's not the same kind of thought process as if you're doing a paid pattern and you're paying for every sheet of paper and you need to make it even. But yeah, I feel there's a lot of redundancy happening too. You possibly can do 2 steps in an image, and there's definitely ways to do that. Just gather your patterns and, start doing research and reading on them, because it's all that information is out there in the world already. We're just collating it.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm really excited to introduce to my listeners is, for those who do take the quilt pattern writing course, you and I are offering a deep dive of these things that we're talking about for alumni. I'm curious to hear you introduce what this is going to look like. I'm putting you on the spot here, but
well, we don't want to give too much away here, but Elizabeth and I definitely have lots to chat about all the time. And we just one night thought we should be sharing this with Elizabeth's community, because some of the discussion that we were having is stuff that's really relevant and that you don't really get to talk about or hear a lot. People hold all of this information so close, and it's really wonderful. I mean, this is what the quilt pattern industry is all about, really is about like why were quilts created. Quilts were created to share memories and share thoughts. And so to me, I feel like, why would we hold knowledge and information to ourselves? That, it's important. I mean, if we want the industry to continue to grow, it's changed so much in 20 years from being, very tutorial style with photographs taken for images, if they had images, to basically Adobe products being the standard. And so that's a huge progression in a short amount of time. So I cannot wait to see what the next 20 years in the quilt pattern industry come. And the only way that we can stay sort of abreast of what's happening is if we work together as a community and we pull all these ideas together. So we've talked about different things like deep diving into a technique or a topic, or, just like things that we've even brushed on today about, if we're going to send our pattern to print, how would that look different than the exact same pattern that's going to be a PDF, as far as how it will be written. If you're writing it for both, then, you would probably write it for the print and then format it for a PDF. But, just thinking about ways even before the pattern writing process starts, what technique you want to highlight, what's special about that technique, and why you chose that technique. Because there's no wrong way to get to anything, any product, or there's no wrong way to use a technique. But when your audience, so if you're a pattern writer, when your customer understands your reasoning for why you are doing 4 at a time, HSD, which everybody's scared of, then,
yes.
Then they will buy into it. So, if your audience, so if you have thought out why you're using a certain technique and all the benefits to that technique, then your audience will buy into your patterns too. So it's pretty exciting.
And yeah, having that why it's power, it's confidence. I remember when college, I studied education as well. And
one of my professors said, when you're teaching a class, know your why, so that if someone comes by, a principal or something, and they're peeking in, they're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You can talk about the pedagogy of like, oh, it's so they learn, blah, blah, blah. Same with 4 at a time half square triangles. If someone's like, you're cutting on the bias, if you can explain your why and say, yes, it does, and this is why I did it, all of a sudden they're like, oh, they're aware, they're knowledgeable, they know what they're doing, and you can feel empowered and confident about what you're doing,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just having the empowerment of, the support of a community, a place to ask questions, but then also just to hear others speak on, geek out really on pattern writing it's the best. It's so fun. And, we need to make tea and geek out on pattern writing way more, because it is just, it's a beautiful industry, and it's a joy to be able to share this.
It is. Well, and this is something that my students have been asking about from day one.
Yes.
And I honestly have been like, no. But with you by my side, I'm like, I can do this. Okay. With Jennifer, I can do this. And so I'm so grateful that we get to do this together. And I know my students, especially at the end of the class, they've had these weekly Q&As, and I'm holding their hand, and every year they're like, don't let us go, And so now we can continue and dive deeper, because the course is 9 weeks. You can learn so much, but there's a whole world of quilting,
Oh, yes.
So I'm really excited about it.
What I always say to my team, and myself, honestly, is I have no ego. And the reason for that is because that's the way that I found that you can learn, because no matter where you're at, there's always something to learn. I'm learning every single day. Some days I feel like too much. I know, but it's just so, it's really the way to grow and to have quick growth, is to not get in your own way, and realize that there are lots of different ways to end up at the same place. And that, just like you said, knowledge is power, and support and community is power, for sure.
Yeah. Because writing patterns, we are sitting behind a desk at a computer, and it can be pretty isolating. And so even just the camaraderie,
oh yeah,
sometimes I'll just reach out to you via Voxer, like, hey, how are you? Just like, I need a friend.
Yes. Oh, I feel so mutual.
Awesome.
Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah. And for our listeners, if they're like, wait, hold on, Jennifer, she sounds amazing. She's got all these skills. What does she do at Riley Blake? Where can they find you?
So I have a personal business. It's called Sew a Story. I am a fabric designer. And like I said at the beginning, is I was an early childhood educator. So my niche is for early years, fabric and dolls using machine embroidery. So I get to have that outlet as well. For me, which is different enough from my day job. So it's, it's just been, everything and more than I thought it would be. So yeah, sewastory.com or Sew a Story basically everywhere. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, and yes, listeners, please do go check out. I've bought some of your panels, and I actually have not made a doll, but I'm going to have to try that, venture into that.
Hey, yes. Well, we'll have to have a little party one night.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure, as always.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm so excited for all the things to come for this industry.
Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the podcast again. She was a guest in the past as well. And like I said, just so talented and knowledgeable, and you can see how and why she's put in the time, and it's a love and an obsession for her. So again, if you are interested in the quilt pattern writing course and joining this amazing thing that she and I are going to be offering, it will be for alumni of the course. So if you're interested in joining, you'll want to sign up for the quilt pattern writing course, which again opens September 9th. And it's only open for a couple of days, and it opens once a year. So join this year if this is something you're interested in. Otherwise, take a look again next September. It opens every September. And again, check out Jennifer. She is talented and wonderful and just such a great person overall. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here. And listeners, I will be back next Friday with a brand new episode for you. Until then, have a wonderful week.